Hello and welcome to my channel. Bonsoir et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this evening I will be talking about The Power by Naomi Alderman. Now, fair warning, this will be kind of a rant review, I'm afraid, because not only was I disappointed by this book, by the end of it I was actually, I don't like this, I'm actually quite angry. So that sucked. That being said, I will try to remain as clear and concise as possible and not let myself devolve into disorganized ramblings. So, with that out of the way, The Power by Naomi Alderman isn't quite a dystopian novel, in my opinion. I would say it's science fiction light, leading up to a future dystopian or post-apocalyptic society, though that society isn't really explored. It's kind of kept at the margins of the narrative overall. So the central premise is that one day, during our contemporary era, women start realizing that they have the capacity to discharge electrical currents. An electrical current that is generated in an electromuscular organ situated in the collarbones. Now, it's described as being kind of akin to what happens in electric eels. This electrical current can be controlled and harnessed in such a way that it can tickle, fizzle, hurt, or outright kill. And, what happens to the world when women become the stronger sex? And quite a bit stronger. This isn't just muscle power. You can zap someone to death, basically, with a touch of your fingers. And the story is told from several points of view, and this kind of, leads up to, spoiler alert, a major conflict, which I guess ends up in a nuclear war or chemical weapons war, something like that, which resets society to zero. The Stone Age, sets society way back. And then 5,000 years later, the world is under a matriarchy, basically. Sex-based oppression has been turned on its head. Women are at the top. Women commit the majority of sexually violent acts. It's patriarchy, but with women instead of men, and it's almost kind of worse than the way patriarchy is understood today. So again, that bit isn't actually really developed. What you see in the story is how you get there, from the moment when women realize they have this power, this ability. Because the way the story is told, at the beginning of the book, you have this correspondence between an author and editor, who is Naomi Alderman. She kind of inserted herself into the novel there, and a male writer who is part of the Men's Writing Association, because, male writers, male artists aren't taken as seriously. It's basically, imagine what female writers and artists had to go through throughout history, and even today, to a lesser extent, thankfully. Apply that scenario to men in the future. And so this male writer wants to publish a somewhat historical account of how the matriarchy came to be. So the novel you're reading is what he's submitting to Naomi, the writer/editor, to try and explain how it came about and to convince the readers that, before the matriarchy, there was actually patriarchy. Men were in power and women were subservient to them. I'm obviously simplifying here. And so he decided to do a half historical account with their diagrams and their drawings, pieces of scripture from the future, and a novel. So that sets it up. And the story itself is told from the point of view of 4 main characters, and you have 2 less important characters, but basically 4 main characters: a female politician, a young woman who was sexually abused by her foster family. She runs away and she basically starts a new religion. And then you have the daughter of a pretty major crime family from London. And then a man called Tunde comes from Nigeria, and he's an aspiring journalist, reporter, and his goal is to chronicle the change in society that's unfolding before his eyes. So you alternate between their chapters. It's written in a pretty, I would call it modern. It's snappy. You read it quite quickly. It's very modern vocabulary. There are no extraneous descriptions. It's quite fast-paced, action-based, perhaps a bit too much, but I'll get back to that. And like I said, there are even drawings or diagrams in this book, because it's, like I said, kind of supposed to be a historical book. Like, it's supposed to be half fiction, half non-fiction. And you also have these little, that I actually found funny, because I've kind of read content like that on the internet. You basically have like a forum exchange between, I guess you could call them MRAs or, you know, conspiracy theorists. And I mean, that's textbook, the kind of stuff you would find on 4chan or, I don't know, Reddit. But I guess it reminded me more of 4chan. So that was kind of amusing, because a little wink to the kinds of online discourses, if you can call it that, that are going on today. But yeah, basically the story is like one gigantic flashback in a way, or it's a historical account, fictionalized historical account of how the future matriarchy came to be. So yes, it's science fiction light, but actually in a way it's also very action-packed. I wouldn't call it an outright action novel, but it's, like I said, very fast-paced. In a way, it's actually too fast-paced. It kind of went in too many directions after a certain point. You kind of lost track of the characters and their growth or lack thereof. So that was very disappointing. And it all builds up. I mean, you can kind of see the ending coming from a mile away. I mean, or at least I could. It's all building. You can feel the anticipation of this big climax that's coming, of a big conflict between all the concerned parties. And then it kind of flops at the end. You can guess at the climax, but she kind of drops the main storyline right at the moment where you expect everything to basically explode and go to absolute shit. It cuts off, and then you're back to this little exchange, this correspondence between Naomi, the editor, and I forgot his name, the male writer, who wants feedback on his manuscript. And so there's a little exchange between them. She commenting on the fact that she finds the story kind of implausible. Really, humans once lived in a way that men were superior to women. I can't believe that, you know, natural order of things is for women to be on top and stuff like that. And he's trying to convince her that, you know, the archaeological data says this and shows that, and this is actually a very plausible scenario. So that's how the book ends. So you can guess at what happened way back when, 5,000 years ago, at the end of the main story. But yeah, that was kind of jarring that it builds up to this climax and then it peters out. Also, I had a sense that the story, as a story of massive societal upheaval and societal change and building conflict, because, you know, the old paradigm is going out, is going to be replaced, all right, but in a way it was kind of over the top, because I should warn you, this book is fairly violent, or at least there are a couple of scenes, and I'll come back to it, that are really, really violent. Now, I'm not too sensitive to that kind of thing, so it didn't bother me too much, but even I was like, oof, that's rough. I hate to use the phrase gratuitous violence because I think it's overused, but she was a bit skirting that boundary of gratuitous violence. It wasn't credible enough in a weird way. I couldn't suspend my disbelief at some point. And that's kind of really, well, obviously disappointing and annoying because it actually started off pretty well. The world building was quite solid for like the first half of the book. The way she describes the electromuscular organ and the collarbones, which is called the skein. I've never actually learned how to pronounce that word. With all, you know, that comparison with electric eels, I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, it's obviously science fiction. I really don't see how humans could somehow develop that or how our genome would accommodate that. But the way she constructed it with how it's connected to the other tissues, that was actually fairly well researched, I guess. So that was neat. And then it went completely south after a point. I was like, I mean, for an example, one of the main characters is a growing religious figure and she hears a voice. Now you could say she's hearing God or she's schizophrenic or what have you, or psychotic, I don't know. And then another character, a politician, towards the end of the story, there's a line where it says she could hear a voice from her skin saying, oh, you can't go there from here or something like that. And I was like, so what? Now all women are bonkers because they have this organ in their collarbones and it's all speaking to them. Like, where did that come from? Like, what the hell was that? It came out of nowhere. It didn't add anything to the story. And I was like, it just pissed me off by that point. I was like, this is ridiculous. Why? And all of it all just crumbled. A lot of the explanations about how society rebuilds through the correspondence between the editor and the author. I was like, but no, that's not how it works. You even understand. But you know, I'll get to it in a few minutes when I get into the themes. But yeah, the world building went to crap, basically. Another problem I had with the novel was that most of the characters were basically unlikable. Now, as such, it's not necessarily a problem. But here, since I disliked so many things about this book, the fact that most of the characters weren't likable either just added salt to the wound. You have Margot. Margot is a mayor of a city in Wisconsin. And she's, well, your basic ambitious politician. She wants to climb the political ladder, get at the top of that pyramid. She does have a concern for her daughters. But in the end, you can tell that it's pretty superficial overall. Yeah, I mean, it didn't really go anywhere. I think you just see her as a corrupt politician, pretty unidimensional, and that's a problem with most of the characters, honestly. Then you have Allie. Allie is a young 16-year-old, also from America. She's basically bounced around the foster care system all her life, and when the power awakens in her, she's being sexually abused by her foster father, and of course the foster mother knows all about it and does nothing, and she kills the foster father with her magical zippity-zappity fingers and runs away, ends up in a convent that specializes in, well, welcoming and harboring young wayward girls, and she starts hearing a voice. Now, the voice, I'm not really sure what that voice was supposed to be, honestly. At first, she believes it's the voice of her dead mother, but then she believes it's the voice of God. But God is a she, it's goddess. Though God tells her, God is beyond sex, male and female. I have both a male and female face. Humanity has worshipped the male face for too long, now it's the turn of the female face. God the mother, and not God the father. So she listens to that voice, and she basically grows into this persona of a religious figure. She takes on a new name, Eve, and yeah, she grows into this preacher, founder of a new religious movement. Now, this voice, I mean, you could take it as a supernatural entity. You could take it as a form of psychosis. I personally lean towards the latter. It's never really resolved, and I guess it doesn't really matter ultimately. Allie, overall, I think has good intentions, at least to begin with, because, like I said, she wants to purvey the message that God is beyond sex, and I don't think women are superior to men. I think her stance is, broadly speaking, a female separatist one, at least at the beginning. So she wants to foster female community, sisterhood, but then she wants to extend her message of love and compassion to men as well. So really wants to promote an image of God the nurturing and caring mother. And then that goes to crap later on for no really good reason. And she decides, sod it. It's too late. The world is screwed. It's too corrupt. It's too far gone. And she's basically fine with having the equivalent of a biblical flood, which I'm guessing is some kind of nuclear war. And yeah, going back to the Stone Age and starting from scratch. And then you have Roxy. Roxy is the daughter of a British crime lord. At the beginning of the story, her mother is killed in front of her eyes, and that's when she discovers she has the power. And she helps her father and her half-brothers, because she's basically a love child of her father's, to kill the rival crime lord who orchestrated the assassination of her mum. Then she has to go to America to lay low for a while, and then she meets Allie, and they strike up a friendship, though Allie thinks she can kind of use Roxy, because Roxy has an unusually strong power. So she contributes to Allie's growing religious movement by contributing monetary funds and things like that, because her family's loaded. And she goes back to Great Britain, gets into the family business, ends up taking over the family business. What can I say about Roxy? She likes guys. That's the thing, she's sympathetic to men, because she's been surrounded by men most of her life. She's very tough. She's like a male-identified woman in a way. So she likes men, she wants to protect her family, but her family kind of screw her over as well, so she's very cynical, very hardened. She was one of the more nuanced characters, ironically, but perhaps not for the right reasons, if that makes sense. And then you have Tunde. Tunde is a Nigerian man, and he is an aspiring journalist. And, well, his big idea is that he's going to be the chronicler of this great social revolution he knows is coming because of the emergence of the power. He's going to write a massive book about it, document everything. He goes around the world. He goes to Saudi Arabia, he goes to India to take pictures, interview women. Now, I've read on some online reviews that they thought Tunde was actually quite sympathetic to the female cause and a positive character. See, I didn't see him that way at all. I didn't see him as negative either. I just think he was very opportunistic. Yeah, he's seizing the opportunity, and fair enough, I guess. But then he gets contacted by this creepy underground group of conspiracy theorists / MRAs, the kinds of dude bros you could find on Reddit or 4chan, like I mentioned. He gets into contact with them and wants to get their side of the story, but while he's not unsympathetic to what the women are going through and not against them, you can see that the fear is growing in him. And I think that's ultimately the point of this character, is he's kind of an exposition tool to explain the concept of, well, rape culture, and to show what it's like for women today to live in fear of sexual violence, of being harassed, raped, because that's happening to him. He almost gets raped a couple of times and he gets into shitloads of danger, but to be fair, I think he was kind of an idiot to go seeking for it as well. And then he gets in touch with Roxy and they have kind of a fling. That was weird. In the middle of chaos and violence, they have a sexual encounter, which I guess was the author's way of introducing the note that, you know, men and women can find harmony and balance and have nice things together by way of sex. I don't know, that felt like a false note, a bit weird. I mean, like I said, a bit of nuance, perhaps, with Tunde, but overall the character arcs didn't really pan out. Their development was cut short and kind of went nowhere because, I mean, she jumps from one character to another. She stays too long with some characters, then not long enough with others. So you end up with a character in another part of the world and you're like, but how did she get there? Why did her mind go that way? You don't really understand. And props to her for making the story international. It's not UK-centered or US-centered, and that's good, but I don't know, I guess she was trying too hard to make it work and it just didn't. Which will lead us to the themes and the main portion of my ranting, I guess. Now, obviously, the main overarching theme of this novel is, well, sexual politics, right? That's a given. But within that, I would say there are 2 to 3 main sub-themes or messages the author, I guess, wanted to convey, maybe. So the first major message, which I think is kind of an obvious one, it really smacks you in the face, is, well, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Oh, no kidding. See, but here's the thing. It was overkill. At the same time, it was over the top with that message. I mean, banging you on the head with it. On another hand, it was too easy. It was cheap. Because, like I said, most of the characters aren't likable or outright effed in the head. Like, one woman is borderline psychotic. Another one is a textbook corrupt politician. Well, yeah, no kidding, is going to corrupt her, absolutely. One is the daughter of a crime lord, for Pete's sake. And you've got the opportunistic journalist who's the poor dude victim, basically. I mean, yeah, it was kind of cheap, in a way. Cheap and over the top at the same time. But to, I don't know, just to have all women, or near to all women as to make no difference, all of a sudden act like violent sociopaths once they discover they can zap people. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, ultimately, but if men who have held most of the power and have, on average, greater physical strength than women, if that doesn't mean all men are crap, why would women discovering they can electrocute people turn all of them into violent sociopaths? So what, we're just all hysterical crazies waiting for the right trigger? Is that the message? I would imagine a lot of women, myself included, would be kind of terrified to hurt the people they loved by accident. I mean, sure, I wouldn't be scared of being raped in the street or raped by someone I knew because I could electrocute them. That'd be nice, but I wouldn't want to accidentally zap or maim or handicap someone because of it either. I'd be terrified. She has the author of the main historical narrative say that patriarchy never got as bad as the matriarchy under which he's currently living. I'm like, what? So women are worse at violence than men, basically. So this isn't even about overturning the status quo or the world order. I mean, this is basically confirming every MRA's darkest, nightmarish fantasy that if women were in charge, they'd be even worse than men currently are. I'm like, what the hell? What the hell kind of message is that? And then obviously, I think she wanted to concentrate on like rape culture and sexual violence and this idea of strength and might makes right. But it ignores other aspects of sex-based oppression. It ignores the role of reproduction and the very roots of sex-based oppression, or at least as I understand them. I feel like there's a lot of ignorance actually towards the subject of feminist theory or feminist conceptualizations of how society came to develop, etc. So that was annoying. And then directly following from that, you have the message, I guess, that an eye for an eye and the world goes blind. Well, yeah, again, no kidding. But why assume that that's the first reaction the vast majority of women would have? Don't get me wrong. I know for a fact, because I have encountered such individuals on the internet from time to time, there are women who have violent revenge fantasies over the men who have hurt them, that being said. Hurt them. Not out of nowhere. Some women have been horrifically abused and probably suffer from PTSD, and they wouldn't mind inflicting that kind of violence. In the female separatist scenario, which is kind of embodied by Ali for the first half of the book, that I've encountered more. For most of the women who want to tell men to go F themselves, they just want to be left alone to their own devices and form female communities. And then the vast majority of women want to find a way to live harmoniously with male humans. So to assume that the vast majority of women are just gonna, like I said, tune into their most sociopathic instincts. Again, why? Because, like I said, she almost makes women out to be worse than men in a way. If we were to gain power, we'd be even more batshit crazy with it than men have been or are currently in some instances. Okay, thanks for that vote of confidence. Like, you got a great opinion of your fellow females there. And that also ignores a huge aspect of feminist analysis, which is internalized misogyny. There's this kind of glorious scene where women in Saudi Arabia gather and have the government topple, and like, they're not ripping their burgers off, but near enough to it. But you know, it's not even sure that would happen. A lot of women have internalized misogyny. These are powerful psychological mechanisms, and she ignores them completely. To just assume that from one day to the next, women would all rise up and start committing atrocities towards men is, for one thing, offensive, and for another, extremely ridiculously unrealistic. So yeah, that's kind of a pipe dream and a really sick fantasy at the same time. See, I don't think women are inherently better than men. I'm of the school of thought that believes there is next to no intrinsic psychological difference between men and women. That's what I believe. I think that's what's mostly backed by science. Not going to go into it though. That being said, there is something called gendered socialization. We are raised a certain way, and that gets ingrained into our psyches. That's also a fact. You can't just ignore that. So even if women had the power to one-up their oppressors and their aggressors, why automatically assume that because I've been raped, I want to rape my rapist? A lot of victims of sexual violence don't want to have sex with their aggressors. Like, that's a weird thing to think about. Like, does she know anything about survivors and what happens to them psychologically? Don't get me wrong, I'm certain there are female sociopaths, and there have been female serial killers, so they exist. I'm not disputing that. But the scale on which she has this happen and spread is completely, I'm sorry, really is over the top. I don't buy this imperative that women would have to torture, rape men in the most sadistic ways imaginable. I'm not saying it would never happen ultimately. I think it can happen, but the way she presents it is just not realistic. Like, there's a scene, really, really gruesome, a bunch of women, and I should add they're hopped up on drugs. She introduces that drug element, but then does nothing with it. I was like, so what was the point of that? Just makes them crazier, I guess. They basically rape and then dismember a guy, severing his limbs by shooting electricity and charring the flesh off the bones. Like, that's snuff film material right there. And why? That's bordering on gratuitous violence, honestly. I was like, okay, don't know what that was doing there, but fine. Again, it goes back to, I think she doesn't understand or isn't familiar with a lot of elements of feminist analysis, and she uses the words patriarchy and matriarchy incorrectly, I believe. I've explained in another video that even today, anthropologists or feminist-aligned scholars don't even talk about matriarchies. They call about matrifocal societies or female-centered societies, but not really matriarchies, because we've never observed the equivalent of patriarchy with females. And then she has the future author say that, oh, we've observed some patriarchies along the centuries where it was very peaceful and men were allowed to lead, but that's never what patriarchy was in any case. Why call it patriarchy then? And she's using those concepts in a very ignorant way, I almost want to say. And again, that sounds horribly presumptuous. I'm not an expert in any of these matters by any means, so take it with a grain of salt, obviously. Just based on what I've read, what I've researched, what I've thought about over the years, it just doesn't fit with this. And a result of that as well is that she plonks in these little elements, these little winks to elements of, rape culture and the discourse around sexual violence. She has that in the correspondence between the author and the female editor in the future. And then it all ends up feeling really quite contrived. It's just like, oh, she's trying to score points of feminist theory in there just because. The thought experiment is actually a valuable one to do. I just wish she'd done it better. Or that another author had tackled it. I've seen something similar actually done by none other than the Queen, Ursula K. Le Guin. But there is no massive rapes of men or even, she says in this book that in the future women mutilate the genitals of men. So they can't have erections unless they are electrocuted and they can't ejaculate without pain. But see, she's just, again, flipping the script of what happens today and what has happened in the past without really understanding why. Even if you think patriarchy is about senseless violence, and some of it is, sure, but even the most gruesome acts endorsed by patriarchal societies actually have a logic behind it. You can disagree with that logic, as I do and as a lot of people do, thankfully, but there is a certain logic to it. Here she just flips the script for no apparent reason. You can't tell me they're going to mutilate men's genitals for 5,000 years just because what? Out of a revenge fantasy that happened before the cataclysm that reset society back to the Stone Age? That doesn't make any sense. That was annoying. I gave it a 2.5 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. Because I do think the thought experiment is interesting. I guess, read it if you're curious. I'm not sure if I would recommend reading it. At least it makes you think. If you've never thought about these subjects before, then that's a valuable exercise. But I think about these things a lot, so because of that, I could really pick it apart. And yeah, left a very sour note in the back of my throat. So that was my Rant review of The Power by Naomi Alderman. Please, by all means, tell me what you thought about this book if you have read it. Let's have a conversation about it. In the meantime, I hope you all have a lovely day or evening. I shall see you in the next video. Bye-bye.